שלום וערב טוב לערב המרגש הזה. יש לנו כאן את דוקטור ביל פטיט היום. דוקטור ביל פטיט יש לו 50 שנים בתחום הפסיכיאטריה. הוא מתרגל של 3 העקרונות ל-40 שנה ולימד פסיכיאטריה. יש לו רשימה מאוד מאוד ארוכה של התמחויות, לפחות 8 שאני מכירה, ואני ממש מתרגשת להקשיב לו, ואני חושבת שהוא מדבר בשביל עצמו ומביא תקווה לבריאות נפש, למשהו חדש שבשבילי נתן לי ריפוי באבחונים מאוד קשים ומביא תקווה לעולם. יש לנו כאן את ג'ני. אני מאוד מתרגשת, לא יודעת אם אתם שמים לב, אבל יש לנו את ג'ני היום. היא מנטורית ומאמנת למנהלים ומקצוענים במעברים מעומס ושחיקה למשחקיות, בהירות ומימוש. יוזמת וממקימות המיזם של 3 העקרונות בשפה העברית שקשורה ל-PPGC. בהמשך השיחה הזאת תעלה לקבוצה שלנו בפייסבוק שכולכם מוזמנים להצטרף אליה, 3 העקרונות בעברית, ואני אעביר את המושכות לג'ני. אני רק לפני שג'ני תדבר, השיחה הזאת תתקיים בערך ל-45 דקות, ואז תהיה הפסקה קטנה של 5 דקות, ואז אנחנו נמשיך בשאלות למי שיהיה דוקטור פטיט. אז ג'ני?
אז יעל יקרה שלי, תודה לך. אני נציג לכמה דקות את יעל, השותפה שלי בעצם להקמה של 3 העקרונות בעברית, ואני אראיין היום את דוקטור פטיט, וממש לכבוד הוא לי להיות איתכם, להיות בתוך המעמד הזה, זה מאוד מרגש אותי. I think that's it. We finished all the Hebrew talking and all the introductions. Yael introduced me and you. I introduced a little bit Yael. And I think I will invite us all to dance today, to dance together and to enjoy it. And the one thing that really helped me when I met Yael, and through Yael I met you, was that she said to me, please don't believe me. Go find out it for yourself. And I guess that's kind of what I wanted to ask you, because I was introduced to the 3 principles through Yael, that I said to her, I don't believe your story, personal story. So she said, okay, what do you need? And I said, tell me, in the 3 principles, is there a psychiatrist there? And she said, oh yes, of course. And she sent me a video of you. So my first question will be, how did the 3 principles met you?
Okay. Now a lot of people don't even know what we're talking about as far as 3 principles, right? Mm-hmm. Am I correct? Yeah, okay. Did Yael Yael, did you tell your story about how you created a black book with my name in it you were so angry, and I just wonder if that would be good for people to hear, Jenny, to hear that it's okay to have whatever initial reaction you have from your stored information, you know, that because I know that I'm going to be talking outside of what I had been taught is possible. So I think it would be wonderful if you're okay with it, the two of you, for Yael to share how angry she was when she actually heard me say that she could have a nice life. Would you be okay with that, Yael?
Okay, I'll do a short version.
Okay.
Should I do it in English, in Hebrew?
You can do it in Hebrew. It's fine if everybody will understand well then.
Okay.
I'm okay.
As
If you say mean things about me, it's okay. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, there's someone that's writing that there's no sound. אז יעל, אם אין לך סאונד, אני מציעה שתצאי ותיכנסי ותתחברי לסאונד, כי אני מבינה שכל השאר שומעים. אוקיי? אין לה סאונד. ג'ני, את יכולה לכתוב לה את זה? אוקיי. אז לראשונה כשאני הגעתי ושמעתי קצת על 3 העקרונות, זה הביא לי הרבה תשובות על כל מיני מקומות בחיים שלי. ירדתי במשקל, נהייתי פחות עצבנית, היה לי קצת יותר סבלנות, והגעתי לראשונה לכנס של 3 העקרונות באנגליה, ונכנסתי לחדר שדוקטור פטיט שיתף על בריאות נפש. ואמרתי לו, איך זה יכול להיות שמישהו יכול להיות בריא? הרי יש לי אבחון, יש לי מאניה דיפרסיה ופסיכוזה. והוא אמר, ככל שאנחנו נבין יותר בין הקשר הרוחני והאנושי שלנו, אנחנו נבין. ואני נורא כעסתי עליו, כי כשהגעתי ל3 העקרונות הבנתי שאני גם יצור רוחני. אז התלהבתי והיה לי אגו מאוד גדול, חזרתי לארץ, שמתי אותו, יצרתי ספר שחור, שמתי את דוקטור פטיט בספר הזה. אמרתי, אני לא מוכנה להקשיב עליו יותר. אני אקשיב לכל האנשים בעקרונות, רק לא לדוקטור פטיט. שנה אחר כך נכנסתי לכנס, נכנסתי לאותו חדר עם דוקטור פטיט, ומישהו אחר שאל את אותה שאלה. ובאותו רגע היה לי שקט בראש. אני הייתי בטוחה שגם הבן אדם הזה יתעצבן. והקשבתי לתשובה שלו. וראיתי איך שבתמימות מאוד גדולה, המאניה נוצרה אצלי כאן. ובאותו רגע ידעתי שאני בריאה. והחיים שלי התחילו להשתנות, גם מתוך המקום הזה והאבחון הזה. So, Dr. Petta, that was my short version.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, so how to start? First of all, I'll be 81 here, 81 years old in just a few months in May. I feel younger inside than I felt at 40 when I met Mr. Banks. Much younger. I met this man, Mr. Sidney Banks, on April Fool's Day, 1983. Which is coming up on 40 years. I had met Dr. George Pransky, a psychologist, January of that year, and he was the one that first told me that few years before that, he had met Mr. Banks and been very, very skeptical, but that the understanding that Mr. Banks had shared with him had changed his life personally, had allowed him to have a relationship with his wife that he never dreamt possible, that his anxiety levels had plummeted, and that he was more creative, productive, and present in his life than he ever had thought that he really would ever be. And so when he asked me to come to this program in San Francisco, this is 1983, this is 40 years ago. There were 250 people in the audience. It was at San Francisco at a hotel. It was Friday evening, and then 2 Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. Must not have been too many practicing Jewish people there, given the schedule. Was not friendly to that. I don't know that I even knew that at the time. So as I sat in the audience, I was 40 years old. I was born in 1942, and so I was just about to be 41 in a couple of months. I'd graduated from medical school in 1969. 14 years before, I had spent 2 years in surgery training, and after 2 years of being exhausted, working on 36 out of every 48 hours and sleeping very little during that time, I put in my resignation and was immediately drafted into the armed forces as we were in the midst of Vietnam. And I became after 6 months of training, I became a family doctor for a squadron of naval pilots. And I was that for 2.5 years, and then got interested in psychiatry because I myself had realized how much my physical well-being, along with my mental well-being, even at my young age, was affected by my my state of mind, how much I was in a state of peace or stress. At the time, I was probably spending about 6 to 9 hours a day in what I'll call stressful thinking, activating my emergency stress response in my body, what they call the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. It's meant to be activated up to 30 minutes every 24 hours. I was through worry, guilt, resentment, judgment and upset of myself and others, unresolved grief, overanalysis, drivenness to prove myself, fear of not being good enough. I was probably spending 6 to 9 hours a day, and had been for at least 20 years, activating that stress response in my body, changing my physiology, changing my neurotransmitters, changing my synapses, killing off cells in my hypothalamus, all those things that have come to be known. And then wondering why I'd gone in and out of clinical depression for 20 years. Why I had to seek 6 different psychiatrists at different times in my life to help me through periods of my education. I was fortunate. I never had to be hospitalized. They were kind people. They were loving people. They were caring people. Each of them had given me a fish when I was starving, but none of them had really allowed me or helped me see how to fish for myself. Even as I take myself back to sitting there in front of Mr. Banks in 1983, I realized that I started to get a little bit choked up. So I don't know if I need to apologize, but at least to let you understand. Here I was with 26 and a half years of formal education. I'd been in psychiatry almost 10 years. I'd had probably 800 lectures on mental illness and medications and other interventions to treat mental illness. I was board certified psychiatrist and had been for years. I had never had one lecture in my 26 and a half years, or even during my psychiatry residency. I had had 0 lectures on mental health. 0. And yet when I got board certified in psychiatry and neurology, because 1/3 of the exam, both verbal and written at that time, was in neurology, I was now referred to as a board certified mental health professional, despite the fact that I'd never had one lecture on mental health. I mean, I think it's hard to argue that it would have been much more accurate to call me a board certified mental illness professional. As I sat in the audience, I sat down next to a man named Billy Hutcherson. He just celebrated his 90th birthday recently. He was a PhD psychologist, and like me, even though he had had all these years of training, he was still looking to find something that would allow him to live in peace the vast majority of the time and be able to point to that to others. And we've been friends for the 40 years since then. And within 30 minutes after Mr. Banks, here this unassuming man, he was 43 years old at the time. It had been about 10 years after his experience, whether you call it an epiphany or whatever, that lasted over 3 days, where he didn't sleep for 3 days. And of course, with my pathological based mind, I thought, oh my God, he went into a manic episode, right? And he'd laugh and he'd say, Bill, he said, yeah, I didn't sleep, but I was very quiet. I felt very quiet inside. And I kept having insights into life and seeing my family with such gratitude and such love, and my coworkers. And I would lie down next to my wife until she fell asleep, and then I would just sit in the chair, and before I knew it, it was morning, but I hadn't slept. And on the 3rd day, he went over to his, and this is all, if people are fascinated, there's there, and somebody could translate for you if you don't speak English well, on www.sydbanks.com. There are, if you go to watch, go to the Long Beach lectures, and the 3rd lecture is him explaining, he says, I think for the 102nd time, his experience. And so you hear it directly from him. But on that 3rd day, they went over to his mother-in-law's from Naimo, from Vancouver Island, over to a little island called Salt Spring. And his mother-in-law and his wife were in the kitchen, and he heard them talking. And by this time, he'd had an incredible awareness that his whole experience, moment to moment, he was creating from the inside out, by using the gift of these three gifts, really one gift, but seen in 3 different ways. That there was a formless, intelligent energy that was animating him, that mind is not, the brain is not the mind. Something has to be powering the mind, powering the heart, powering the whole body. An intelligent energy of mind, creative energy of thought, the same divine energy that creates all the planets and the everything in creation, has been given to us as a gift to create our experience during a time that we're here in form. That this is not our first home. This is our second home. I love the Hebrew tradition, or I don't know what word you would call it, where that the angel puts right here on the philtrum, because we're coming from the divine, and pushes us right here so we forget everything we know. And then we spend our life here in form trying to reawaken the awareness that we have inside of us of what we really are. At the essence that we're divine energy, not separate of God energy, not God, but of God. And that we're using these three divine gifts of mind, thought, and consciousness, awareness, to navigate our way through life, one thought at a time. Now, I certainly didn't hear that in the first 30 minutes. And I remember the first thing Mr. Banks said, as he says on his videos on the Long Beach lecture, as was pointed out earlier that I had said, he said, please don't believe anything that I'm going to say. And I mean that. It's not a psychological trick. Because as Mr. Banks said, if you believe authority in any authority just because they say it, you've given away your freedom of thought. I somehow got no longer see myself, but that's okay. You've given away your freedom of thought, but it's okay to be a listener, to listen openly, to trust that you have been given a guide inside, that you know when you're hearing truth, if your mind is quiet. I love, Eileen, again, I love the Hebrew saying that if I might not have it correctly, but as I heard it is, words that are spoken directly from the heart reach the heart. I think the same is true, that words spoken directly from truth reach the place of truth that we have all inside of all of us. So as I sat there, within 30 minutes, all I can tell you is that I had at least 300-pound weight come off my chest. That I had carried for a long, long time. I didn't do anything to have it come off. All I did was sit quietly and listen with an open mind and an open heart. I have to make up what was it that I saw? I don't know. The first thing that I can say that I saw intellectually was that I saw that metaphorically, I was spending 6 to 9 hours a day with this beautiful gift and power of mind, thought, and consciousness. I was innocently slamming my being with the innocent misuse of it. And then wondering, doing that 6 to 9 hours a day, and then being incredibly puzzled that I had another one of those right-sided headaches, wondering where it came from and how I got it again. And if any of you would have been my doctor and I would have gone to you, now I'm talking about my depression, but we'll use the metaphor of a right-sided headache. I would have literally stood in front of you and said, I don't know, it just seems to come out of the blue. I don't know where this headache, if I knew where I got this right-sided headache, I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you, doctor. You're supposed to be able to tell me. I suddenly saw where my right-sided headache was coming from, where my 20 years of depression were coming from my rather constant state of balancing between significant and overwhelming depression, stress was coming from. It was coming from me. I can't tell you how freeing that was. People say, wait a minute, why could that be exciting to you? I can tell you how it could be exciting to me, because the things that I had attributed my stress to were things that I had little or no control over. Many of the things had actually happened years ago. They were over. They didn't exist in the present moment except as a memory. Things I had done, things that others had done. Many of them were worries about things that I've made up because I wasn't in the present. I was worrying about what might happen in the future. I love the movie maker. It's funny, I'm blocking on his name right now. It'll probably come to me. He made a movie, he made many movies and usually starred in them. And he made a movie many years ago called The Sleeper, in which he wakes up and he realizes that he's been asleep for 25 years. Woody Allen, a Jewish filmmaker. He realizes he's been asleep for 25 years. And when he realizes it, he goes, oh my gosh, 25 years. I could have been halfway through my analysis. You see, until that day sitting in front of Mr. Banks, I was like a carpenter. My son is a contractor. He has a van full of probably nearly $50,000 worth of tools. But for the first 41 years of my life, using the metaphor of a contractor, I was going to the building site with only a hammer. Analysis, analytical thinking, and then wondering why everything started looking like a nail. Because that's all I had. I did not know. People had, I suppose, tried to point it. I was raised Catholic. I was indoctrinated, like most children, into some belief system. I had a person recently that I helped, assisted as best as I could from Kuwait, and he told me in his second meeting, or first or second meeting, that he was MBA, and I thought that meant Masters of Business Administration. He said, "Oh no, I'm Muslim by accident." Here's the deal: if any of us had been born in Kuwait, we probably would have been MBA. I told him I had friends that were CBA and JBA, and from India, HBA. Everybody's trying to have a sense of the mystery of life and where it came from and what the nature is of the energy behind life. Again, remember that I tell you, don't believe anything I say, and I mean it. Because if I say anything that offends you, just say, oh, hell, he's 81. What do I expect? I saw some recently where there's some study that says that 55 to 85%, and I would say it's been my experience in 40 years in psychiatry that 55 to 85% of all mental illness has as a major factor a belief in a judging and punishing God. That people fear eternal damnation as they think about the inevitability of death, which we all face. So when Mr. Banks started talking about that what he saw was at the source of life was pure love and understanding, that was something new for me to even look in that direction. That he's saying that whatever we call God is pure love and understanding, 100% benevolent, beneficent. Wow. I took down recently, I was listening to that tape on Mr. Banks's experience. He said, I realize this is pretty short. I don't usually read much to people, but it's just a few lines, so bear with me. He said, I realized there was no such thing as insecurity. It's only thought. It hit me like a ton of bricks. He had been adopted at birth, born to a teenage girl in Scotland in 1930, and adopted out to a very poor family that I sense must have been pretty rough. I never realized it before, but on one of the tapes he said when he had this experience, the horror of his childhood disappeared. Horror is a pretty big word. And he said, I even felt love for those that had done hurtful things to me. He has this exchange with his mother-in-law and wife, and he stands up. He's going to try to explain to them what's happening. And here's what he says. I stood up. Suddenly, it was like I was being sucked down a tunnel. There was a buzzing sound, and I was enveloped in a white light. It was then that I realized the true meaning of God, and I started to cry. There were tears of joy. So since that weekend in 1983, it's been an incremental journey for me of exploring and understanding these universal principles. If it's okay, I'll go ahead and share, but I'm fine on stopping. I know I talked for a long time, and I'm fine on going for an hour and 45 minutes if people can. I have somewhere to go at the top of the hour, but we still have I can go for another hour is what I wanted to say if you want to, you know. But would you like me to, I was going to share, Jenny, my next two powerful insights, I guess, or experiences. But do you want to continue with your questions? It's fine.
Maybe I will just share with you and the guys. I didn't think till this moment that Yael shared the principles with me, and because I didn't believe her story, that it's possible to be healed from mania depressia, yes, or PTSD, or severe PTSD, because the books showed different things. I listened to you and I listened to the principles for a long time, and I started to write in Hebrew. And after 3 months that I was writing Sydney Banks in Hebrew, just for myself, because of curiosity, I called Yael one day and I said, Yael, you will not believe it. He said the principles are one, but when I translated it to Hebrew, when I translated it through Mr. Sydney Banks, it was mind, and he called it that. And he said, well, the rabbis also called us, why don't we talk about that? And settling the mind is called Yeshuv Hadat, that we can settle our mind. And it's not new in the Jewish tradition. And then I said, and consciousness is Toda'ah. And it's the same word, yes? Dat, Toda'ah. And the word thought. He said, there is personal thought. And I said to Yael, what is a personal thought? And I said, De'ah. It's an opinion about something. It's personal. And it's the same word. And then he said, and there is a universal thought. And I said, Yael, this is called Yedi'ah, a knowing. And I said, it's all based on the Yael, how do I say Shorosh?
Root.
Thank you. Of the word da. And da means knowing or understanding. And Mr. Sydney Banks is talking all the time about understanding and knowing from the inside. And I said, in Hebrew, it's just
וזה בסדר. זה מוקלט.
פספסתי משהו? Okay. It's just written in the words. And I wrote to Marina, it's all one word, actually. It is one word. It's the same root. And it's beautiful and simple. And then I started to cry. And I called Yael and I said, Yael, we need to talk about it again. It's not something new. We can just remind people what they know, what is written in front of them all the time. And I didn't believe her, so I had to go and try it on myself and on my relationship with my husband, with my relationship with my kids, with my relationship with my parents, these poor parents that went through all 8 years of psychotherapy. And all they heard from me about them and my education and the past. And I'm really grateful, and I cannot not share it. And the thing that caught me because you were the first one that I was listening to, I think I heard from you nothing broken, nothing lacking. And I said, oh, really? How can this be in the world of psychosis, in hospitals? What do you mean? And then I was really intrigued. Do you want a break for you, or do you want to continue?
Sure. I could take a 3-minute break and be back.
Okay.
Okay.
I think you had a great plan of sharing.
Good.
Okay, guys. בואו ניקח 5 דקות, יעלי?
הוא אמר 3 דקות, זה יחזור 3 דקות, להתרענן, לעמוד, לשתות
כן.
מים, אנחנו נחזור עוד 3 דקות.
איפה יהיה אפשר לראות את ההקלטה של הלייב הזה?
אז קודם כל, עד שדוקטור פטיט יחזור, אנחנו, קודם כל יש לנו קבוצת פייסבוק, קוראים לזה קהילת 3 העקרונות, וזה יעלה ליוטיוב, אפשר להצטרף לקבוצה.
איך? רגע
אני אניח את הלינק לקהילה.
בצ'אט.
איך? קהילת 3?
קהילת 3
אני כבר מניחה לינק.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It sounds like people were having some questions. Can you give them my website, which is new and revised, different from the one you might get if you go on Google. It's DR, standing for doctor, just drbillpettit.com. drbillpettit, PETTIT.com.
Thank you. וואי, ג'ני, את היית ממש מעוררת השראה מקודם, מה שהקסמת אותי.
So I'm ready whenever you are, Jenny, to proceed.
Okay. Okay, guys. יעלי, תוכלי לטפל בלינק? אני אמשיך. Before we went to break, you said that you have like 2 insights or 2 points that you want to point us to.
Well, they were just kind of sharing 2 of the most powerful experiences that I had soon after meeting Mr. Banks. You know, actually, it's interesting because I'll share the 2 personal, my first 2 personal, everybody's is different. I've shared really my first one was that I saw that I was creating my experience from the inside out. Now, I think when people have that experience, it frees them up tremendously. But all of us have a pile of things that it doesn't apply to. Except if this would happen, except if that would happen. And one of the things that's happened over the years is that every year I've looked over and that pile has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. So, but one of the other first things that I saw was that that people were not making me angry, that I had the anger machine on my hip pocket. And when people did things that I didn't like or not the way I liked them to do it, I turned on the anger machine and then blamed them for causing me to be angry. That I was literally creating my experience moment to moment. One of the most powerful things for me was to see separate realities, to see that every human being, as you pointed out earlier, is having their own personal thinking, and that no 2 people that have ever existed on the planet have ever had the same experience. They've
not even partners.
No, especially partners. My wife, Linda, and I live in entirely different worlds. There's a little cross section, and that was the same way with my first wife of 31 years that died in 2000 of cancer. And Linda and I met 3 years later on Valentine's Day, actually. We just had our 20th anniversary because she came to speak at the medical school at the integrative grand rounds on Valentine's Day. And I just wrote a piece on this that I'll probably be in my blog in the future. Lunch or unconditional love? Lunch, unconditional love. Because I came out of my office and I was headed, my stomach was growling, and I was going to lunch at the medical school at West Virginia in 2003 on Valentine's Day. And I saw this sign of this attractive redheaded woman, and God gave me the attracted to redheads gene. I'm going to blame it on God. It served me well, but and so that was kind of the left jab that kind of got my attention. But then the title of her presentation for Grand Rounds was The Healing Power of Unconditional Love. And that was, in a boxing metaphor, the right cross that brought me down. And so I went to her presentation as I said, we'd both been widowed about 2 to 3 years, and we were married 7 months and 6 days later. And that's 20 years ago. But one of the things that happened in my first marriage was that after 10 years, we were apart for 3 years and when we got back together, we loved each other dearly, but we had no idea that we lived in different worlds. It was always about who was right and who was wrong. And once I saw what Mr. Banks was pointing to, I went, whoa, wow. Let me listen to my wife, who I love with my whole heart. Let me listen and understand the world that she lives in, so that my world can get bigger. And once I started listening to my late wife, truly listening, not to catch where I could be right, but to understand her world, lo and behold, she started listening to me. And both our worlds got bigger and bigger. And the feeling level, the intimacy, the closeness came rushing in, because it was always there. It was just shrouded or obfuscated, I can't say that word, shrouded by our own personal thinking. So those were incredible things to realize. There's a movie, a Disney movie called Frozen, which I don't know if people have seen it, but there's a Olaf is the snowman. And one of the third things that I saw was Olaf in Frozen. The snowman says, no one, which is a big word, no one, every, all, those are big words. Olaf says no one makes good decisions when they're scared, stressed, or angry. Wow. No one. So whenever I found myself in that experience, I metaphorically put duct tape on my mouth and sat on my hands, so I didn't say or do anything that made things worse. But and if you wanted to say something, go ahead, please do. I want to make sure too, Aviva Pashur is on the call here, and I don't know if she'd be willing to, but before we end today, I want to give Aviva at least 5 minutes to talk about her experience and what she's seen, because to me, she's one of the wiser women that I've ever met in my life. So, but can I tell 2 of the first powerful experiences that speak to this? Mr. Banks, after that weekend, I met with Mr. Banks and a number of people that were involved, PhD psychologists, Dr. Keith Blevins, and George wasn't a PhD at the time, but other people, Mark Howard, Dr. Mark Howard, a PhD psychologist, Enrique Suarez, Kimberly Cadu. I met a number of people, and Sid said, I'm mentoring 3 PhD psychologists in Miami, outside of Miami, Florida. I'd like you to go there and do a fellowship with them. And this was 1983. On the way from California to Florida, across the country, we stopped at my hometown in the Midwest in Illinois, town of about 35,000 people, to stay for 3 days with my mom and dad. And then we were going to go 50 miles further to my late wife's home, and three days, and then continue on to Florida. I was unprepared for what was going to happen, because I didn't realize that my eyeballs had changed. When your feeling level changes inside, shifts, it comes out your eyeballs. You see a different world. My father and I had, not physically, but we were so much alike that we could not even watch a sporting event without having a 50% chance that one of us would storm out of the room. And after I had met Mr. Banks in 1983, and we drove to my hometown on the way east, when I saw my father for the first time, I saw him through eyes of unconditional love. I saw what a beautiful man he was. I saw that he had done his very best, given the way that he saw the world, to be a good father and to be a good to us, the six of us, the family. Even the spankings he gave me, and I got them repeatedly when I was young. I'm sure I met diagnosis for oppositional defiant disorder. But in the late 1940s, the treatment in the United States, at least, for oppositional defiant disorder was wait till your father gets home. And I got spanked many, many, many times. And I remember my father saying to me, you know, this hurts me more than it does you. I certainly didn't believe that at the time. In my little 8-year-old head, I'm thinking, want to trade places? But now, looking back, given the Catholic doctrine of a God that was going to send people to, this loving God that was willing to send people to, had created a place where people were going to go for an eternity in hell for torment. I looked up eternity in my it's a really long time to be in torment. My father, I see, and I heard him say something when I graduated from high school that I saw in retrospect, he was doing the best he could to make sure that I didn't end up going to an eternity in hell. And if that meant spanking me 3 times a week for a while, it was a small price to pay to save me from that. Tragically, we had a woman in the United States a few years ago who got depressed, and through her depressed eyes and her view of a wrathful, judgmental God, literally drowned her 5 little boys one at a time in the bathtub to save them from the possibility of going to an eternity of hell. It was out of love. Distorted love. Well, you're really an upper, Dr. Pettit. I feel so much more lighthearted listening to you. Sorry. But I saw my father, and my father told me stories in the next 3 days. He told me more stories in the next 3 days about his life than he had told me in the first 40 years of our lives together. We didn't talk about it, but he must have felt the shift where I saw him through eyes of love. So I'll share this one clinical story. I will tell people that are interested in, first of all, I'll say that if you can get Mr. Banks's videos and books translated, that he had a direct experience. I think he was given a peek into the mind of God that was one of the bigger peaks that there have been. That's just my hit on it. So, and he would say that he was an echo, that you can't talk truth. You can only do an echo of the truth from the best that you can. And I'm an echo of an echo. But there is on my on my website and on Elizabeth Lovius's, I can't think of her website in England, where she did interviews with me, and there's at least a dozen, if not 14 interviews called, the first one is One Cause, One Cure. And the next ones go through the DSM or the ICD-11. And from my 35 years of experience at the time, there's stories of hope, anxiety disorders, stories of hope, depressive disorders, stories of hope, trauma disorders, stories of hope, addiction disorders, stories of hope, personality disorders, stories of hope, schizophrenia, and psychotic disorders, etc., etc., etc. The story I'm going to tell you briefly, and I'll make it, because of time, I'll make it as briefly as I can, but I told this story at a conference in London a few years ago, and a man stood up, raised his hand, and he said, that's not true. You can't, that's impossible. And, you know, what can I say? I said, I guess you're calling me a liar, but I can tell you that I'm too old. I go to bed every night with what I do and say, and I sleep well. I'm not willing to lie. I might have done that a few times as a younger man. Because of the experience that I had with my father and my wife had with her mother when she went to visit her for 3 days, we stayed for a year in Galesburg, Illinois. There was a huge mental health hospital there. Even in 1983, it had 700 patients, 900 employees. It was being threatened to be closed, and it eventually was closed. Not while I was there. There was 350 psychiatric patients, 350 autism, mental disability, developmental disability patients. And I was the only psychiatrist, except for one psychiatrist in the front office. These patients were being treated by doctors, nurses, psychologists. The doctors were family doctors who had taken courses in psychopharmacology. So I was asked to consult. And this one psychologist, when I started telling him that everyone had perfect mental health inside, it was spiritual, that we can only shroud it over. You can't lose it. You can't even scratch it. He kept telling me that I was, well, I don't know what the word is in Hebrew, but I was full of poop, we'll call it. And at the same time, he got comfortable enough that he shared with me that he had a terrible anxiety disorder, and that he would have panic attacks on a regular basis, especially when he tried to try out for, in his little town, the theater. He wanted to be in theater, but he would get panic attacks and not be able to do that. 6 weeks after we started having lunch about 2 to 3 times a week, he told me that surprisingly his panic disorder had disappeared and that he was no longer anxious. It had gone down about 85 to 90%. But he had I was still full of poop. He had no connection between our conversations. But he did ask me to sit in as a co-leader in a group of 21 or 22 people with the diagnosis of chronic schizophrenia. Now, I know to you therapists, what I'm going to tell you, your intellect is going to, and all I can say is ask you to listen. If you go to those videos, you'll hear hundreds of stories. It's not Bill Pettit, it's the message. It's the point, what I'm pointing to, what I speak to in people, because I see them as whole and healthy. So I was in this group with these 21 people with chronic schizophrenia. Many of them had been there for many, many years in this state hospital, and he and I were there. And for the first 2.5 group meetings, there was this one man over in the left side of the circle who had his chair askew outside of the, kind of half outside of the circle. And he was sitting quietly dialoguing with his auditory hallucinations during the meeting. He wasn't disruptive, so I didn't feel a need to say anything. I know some of you have heard this, Yael, I suspect you have, but he started laughing. He started laughing, and not just laughing or chuckling. He was laughing to where he was holding his stomach and his eyes were watering. And if you've ever been around somebody who has that experience, it's more contagious than the pandemic. Everyone caught it immediately and was holding their stomachs, their eyes watering, bent over, laughing so hard, not having no idea why we are laughing. And we're all begging. I said to the psychologist, I said, what's his name? He said, Herb. I said, Herb, stop it. Just stop it. He didn't. It went on for 7 to 10 minutes. He would start to slow down, and it was like an earthquake. He would have another insight and have an aftershock and start laughing even harder. And finally, when he stopped, I waited till he wiped his eyes. I waited till he was breathing normal. And I looked over at him and I said, how long has he been here, to the psychologist? Said he's been here 47 years. He's 67 years old. He's been in the state hospital since he was 20. They tried a few times to get him out, but didn't last long. I said, Herb, would you be okay to tell us what's so funny? And Herb picked up his chair. He put it fully in the group for the first time. He sat in it. He looked across the room to me, looked right into my eyes. And he said, Doctor, while you were talking, I suddenly realized that I've been making myself crazy with my own thinking for 47 years. And then he said something, and Sid used to say, there will be people, Bill, that will jump beyond what you see. They will see beyond what you're pointing to. They will see beyond you. Now, I was open to that, but I don't know that I was expecting for somebody who had been in a state hospital for 47 years to jump beyond what I saw. But Herb said, after he said, I realized I've been making myself crazy with my own thinking for 47 years. He said, and I don't have to do it anymore. Whoa. I saw that I was doing it and was hopeful that I might see how to at least decrease the frequency and the impact that I was hitting myself with my thinking. But I did not see what Herb saw, and I don't have to do it anymore. I will tell you, my first thought was, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for trying to help people have a little less suffering. I didn't sign up for people who had been in a state hospital for 47 years to realize that they were fine inside. It took me 6 weeks to get Herb out of the hospital. He literally then talked to us, which I won't take the time, for 20 minutes, telling us the story of how he had become psychotic and what the process was and how he stayed there how he get out of it, but go back into it with his thing. It was spellbinding. You wish somebody was surreptitiously filming you so you could play it for people. It took me 6 weeks to have people, the head people in the front office, the people on the floor knew that something within very short time, knew something dramatic had happened to this man. I had to get him off his 10 medicines as quickly as I could, or 8 medicines, whatever it was, because they were now poison to his physiology. I had a 3-year follow-up. That psychologist would give me, I was no longer full of poop from that day on. He would give me a 6-month follow-up, even after I left there to go on to Coral Gables. He would give me, for 3 years, I had follow-up. He was living in an apartment. He'd go down to the senior citizens place every day. He had a girlfriend. They went to movies. They went dancing. He never was on medications again. He had many friends. Wow. Never again did I question that God's energy was at the core of every person I sat in front of. It didn't matter where or what situation was. And that was only their misunderstanding or insufficient understanding of these 3 universal principles and their use of them, and the wisdom beyond the intellect that is accessible to every one of us every moment of our life when we're willing to be present as best as we can in our lives rather than in our thoughts. So let me stop with that. I could go on forever. We could be here.
It's beautiful.
15 hours from now, and I'd still be telling stories. When I was in Israel in 2008 for 13 days with Rabbi Chaim Levine, who founded Brothers for Life, BFL, which had 27 at that time. We did a weekend weekend on the sea there with 27 veterans from the Lebanon wars with PTSD, and many of them with severe physical injuries. On the 6th day of the 13 days I was there with Rabbi Chaim Levine, he said to me, he said, Bill, we were staying together at the same place. He said, Bill, I have a new name for you. And I said, what's that, Chaim, Rabbi Chaim? He said, it's Bill, do you have time for a story petted? I said, Chaim, I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, yes, you do. You know damn well you do. He didn't say damn, probably. Anyway, so let me stop and listen.
It's beautiful. I'm listening to you and I'm saying, wisdom is tvuna. In Hebrew, to look at something means lehitbonen. And when you look into something, you find wisdom from inside. And it's so beautiful because it's just in front of our nose. But sometimes we need to walk some distance to see it. Viva, I heard somebody called you before.
Yeah. So we would like to hear Aviva, and also אנחנו נשמע מאביבה, ואם למישהו יש שאלות, אז תצביעו. יש פה ב-reactions, יש מקום להצביע, ואחרי אביבה אנחנו ניקח כמה שאלות לפי הזמן שיתאפשר לנו. בסדר? אביבה.
So, Bill, to hear from one of the wisest people in my mind in the world that I am a wise woman was a great, made me feel, I don't know how to say it, but it was very heartwarming for you to say that. And it really made me think about something that I really understood recently. I remember when I was asking you, how can Sydney Banks say that we are all the same? He has this sentence on the missing link that we all, you read it many times, how we are all the same, right?
Well, what he says is, I think, if this is right here, he says each living soul experiences life as an individual. that's why all humans live and see a separate reality. But then he says, the divine truth that lies within each living soul never changes.
Right.
It's eternal.
And
That every single person has spiritual wisdom that lies within the consciousness of every human being. Yeah.
right. And I used to ask you, how can he say that? How can he say that every human being has the same spiritual wisdom? And because I always put myself in front of other people and say, they're much bigger than me, they're much wiser than me, they much more spiritual than me. And that's something that I really, really accept now, how we are all the same. We all come from the same, we're all made out of the same spiritual energy, or whatever we want to call it.
Yes. And that
Very,
he
very clear to me now.
It says it's only to the degree of the individual's psychological and spiritual understanding
Right,
does it appear to vary.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
So
Thank you. Is there anything else that you wanted to share? Or I'm thank you. Yeah.
well, if I share something about my journey, is like I would say that when I first was introduced to the three principles, I really sensed that there is something new, something that I can learn from, something that I didn't hear before, even though I was exposed to other spiritual teaching and understanding. However, when I was listening to people sharing their experiences from the three principles, I was kind of jealous because they all were talking about this big insight that they had. You know, I had this insight and it changed my life, and that insight, and I never sensed that I have one big insight. I felt like how gradually my life is changing because I was able to integrate this understanding. And the way, like even this week, I remember I was driving somewhere and all of a sudden I have no idea, for whatever reason, I was start thinking about all the things that I'm sorry that happened to me, or that I'm sorry that I was start feeling guilty about things that I did wrong in my life. And I was, my mind was going with all these stories, and then I said, wait a minute, do you really want to go there? Do you really? And I just went the other way. And so I have many examples like this, how I really don't believe my thinking. I fall into it and then I say, no, I'm not my thinking, and I turn the other way. So it really influenced every aspect of my life, I can say, with my relationship with myself and the people around me.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
I'm very thankful. And thank you for everything that I learned from you.
Well, yeah, we're all, you know, maybe I pointed and you saw beyond my finger,
Okay.
but we're all drinking from the same divine well of wisdom.
Absolutely.
We all are. You know, there's I know you were instrumental in putting into Hebrew the my guide inside, and the first 4 lessons, if I think I can do it in about 2 minutes. I tell people, Jenny, that these first 4 lessons, and these are for 1st through 4th graders.
Yeah, sharing them in Hebrew.
There's teacher's manual and the student manual for 1st through 4th graders, 5th through 8th, and 9th through 12th. So some of you have heard me say in a presentation that if I had learned in my 26.5 years of education, the first 4 lessons for 1st graders in the my guide inside, which I did not learn, that my life would have been so much more gentle, and the lives of people around me would have been so much more gentle. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read the little blue section from the first 4. Is that okay, Yael and Jenny? I think I can do it pretty quickly. I'll try to censor. Bill, do you have time for a story, Petitt?
And then we have a question for you.
Okay. Afterwards? It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. Okay. So imagine, if you can, that we're all first graders and we're in first grade, and the teacher comes in and says, welcome, come along. This first week, we're going to learn something new. You have a guide inside. It's wisdom and common sense. Everyone has this guide inside. Just look for the feeling. You can trust your guide. It points you in the right way. Wow. Wow. Second week, teacher comes in. Last week, you guys did great with your stories and with the things we asked you to do, and you saw that you discovered your guide inside. Now this week, get ready to learn that your feelings are created by your thoughts. What? I thought it was what that person just said or did to me, or what might happen tomorrow, or happened yesterday. What? Let's learn something new. My thought creates my feeling. All my feelings come from thought. I can let unwanted thought pass by, and well-being is present. Wow. Now, it doesn't mean that vast majority of our thinking is probably unconscious, but our feeling level, we will experience it. And whenever my feeling level leaves loving and lighthearted, I don't look to my thinking to find the answer. I go to stillness as best as I can. Number 3, happiness is inside of me. Listen, number 3 is, you learned last week you learned your feelings are created by your thoughts. In chapter 3, be ready to discover that happiness is inside of you. Wait a minute. I thought happiness was out there. Was that pretty girl that thought I was cool. It was that good score on a medical test. It was that winning a tennis match. The problem was every day I had to get enough happiness out there and not feel starving. And now you're telling me that I'm never starving, that happiness is inside of me. When clouds cover the sun, I know the sun is still in the sky. As clouds pass by, I know I will see the sun again. My cloudy thoughts also pass by. If I leave them alone, I would say. When that happens, I feel happy. It's simple to see happiness is inside of me. Now, the fourth and last, there's 8, but I'm only doing the first 4. On this 4th lesson for first graders, after over 40 years exposure to these principles, on a good day, I get a B or a B minus. I've gotten B a couple of days, but usually it's a B minus on a good day. And on my bad days, I get a C minus or a D plus. Is anybody curious on what the fourth lesson is for first graders, that after 40 years, I'm still getting a D plus a considerable number of days? I see some nods. In chapter 3, you learned, and last week, you learned happiness is inside of you. This week, you're going to learn that you can choose between, you can see that you're thinking fast and furious, and you can get present in your life and your thinking will become calm and curious. Wow. Somebody once gave me a thing from their spiritual calendar that said human beings are the only of God's children that goes faster when it's lost. Animals stop. They do not move. They listen, they smell, they do not move. They become still. Be still and know that I am God. They become still. Simple lesson. Mr. Banks always said, when the answer is simple, it's the spirit. When the answer is complicated, it's the intellect. I'll stop. But I used to think that all I had was analysis. Now I think that about 3% of my life lends to analytical thinking. The other 97% lends to being present in the now, in my life, with a loving, light heart. Period. And there's something simple about, to the degree that I'm in my life rather than in my thoughts, I don't have to work about, I don't have to work at being loving and lighthearted. It's just, that's all there is in the now. I'm not contaminating it with thoughts. By the way, did you know that there, in all 195 countries, there's an organization based on unconditional love? That might be good argument for people wondering if there's any evidence that what's behind life is unconditional love. Do anybody know the name of that organization? It's called grandparenting. Because we parents want to love unconditionally, but sometimes our fears and expectations of what other people will think or shoulds get in the way of that unconditional love. I'll stop.
Thank you, Dr. Petitt. That was beyond brilliant. We have one question here.
Sure.
Rachel, thank you for waiting so patiently.
Hi, Dr. Bill. How are you? It's so good to see
Hi.
you.
Hi, Raquel. Do you say Raquel?
Rachel, Rachel.
Rachel. Okay.
Everything
Okay.
goes.
Okay.
Everything goes.
Okay.
So I have a question about medications.
Sure.
And when people are on medications for whatever diagnosis they're on, what is your take about them getting off medications?
I'm sorry, what is the question again? What does it take?
What is your take about them getting off medications?
Well, it's probably going to surprise you a little bit, because, and I'll try to be short here, but I'll answer the question first. Let me get quiet here so I'm not just on automatic.
One moment. We're just going to translate the question. What
does it take to get
מה
through?
חוות הדעת של דוקטור פטיט על אנשים שנמצאים על תרופות, כרגע תרופות פסיכיאטריות, ומה הוא חושב על זה? איך אפשר לא להיות על תרופות?
Raquel, do you have any thoughts that you want to share about the question that you're asking?
Well, I'm a retired pharmacist and I've heard your opinion, but I don't think people are aware of what you know, and I would love to hear it again.
Oh, okay. Can you summarize my opinion in Hebrew?
I'll let you talk first. And
Okay. So when people used to, sometimes when I was in practice, and it may happen again as I go back into the practice of psychiatry, it would say, I I've heard about you, and I want you to help me get off all my medications. And I sometimes would, I guess my mischievous gene is still active, because I would say to them, you probably should see a different psychiatrist then, because that's never my goal, is to get you off your medications. And they go, what? What? I say, well, it's not my goal. My goal is to help you find the deepest level of peace possible. That's my goal. Now, as that occurs, you're most likely going to need less and less and less medication. But in your journey at the present time, if you still need X amount, then that's, if you get into I'm not okay until I'm off medication, you're going to get in the way of finding peace, because you're not accepting where you are in the present moment. Mr. Banks said people would ask him, how do you find this wisdom? How do you access this spiritual wisdom, this divine wisdom that is at the core of her being? He said, very simple. It's being grateful for what you have and what you've seen. And if you stay in that feeling of gratitude, you will continue to see more. But to the degree you're not in acceptance of where you are, you're going to wonder why you're stuck where you are. So, you know, now I will say that Robert Whitaker wrote a book called Psychiatric Drugs and the Pandemic of Psychiatric Drugs and the rapid rise of mental illness in America. And what it shows is some remarkable stories from three large World Health Organization studies that the drug companies have been pretty good at keeping under wraps, that show that, let's take schizophrenia and psychosis, the diagnoses. In the countries, there's 3 World Health Organization studies that show they were 15 years apart, because nobody could believe that these studies showed what they showed consistently, that in countries, developing countries where they could not afford to keep people who had psychosis or schizophrenia or whatever label for more than 4 to 6 weeks because they couldn't afford the drugs, they had a 40 to 45% complete cure rate. And over 70% of the people went back to full employment. Whereas in the United States, in Russia, and in European countries that can afford to keep people on those 5% cure rate. Now, the last I looked at my math, 40 over 5 is an 800% better record. The medications, Sid said one time to somebody, they're God too, you know, they're God energy too. But they have to be used from wisdom. And if I used them, and I used a lot of them sometimes, to get people to a place where they weren't so terrified of their thoughts that they could hear me and they could read Mr. Banks's books. If they had ADHD at the beginning, maybe I would give them Adderall, stimulants, Ritalin, whatever, to calm their mind to where they could read and listen and get in touch with the wisdom that was within their own consciousness. It gave me a window of opportunity. When people were so anxious, I put them on high doses of medicine. If they were having hours every day of panic attacks, it used to be that there was a 10% suicide rate from panic attacks. It was so terrifying to people. They didn't understand that it was like the rumble strips on the side of the road trying to wake you up. It was benevolent. beneficent gift, trying to get you look to the spiritual inside. So that's within the time frame that we have. That's the best answer I can give.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
May I add something from my experience as a pharmacist
Sure.
to what you just said? I was a relief pharmacist, so I worked in different areas in Los Angeles. And it was very interesting to me in the time, the different medications that people got depending on their financial status. And it just was fascinating how people in Beverly Hills had totally different medications that people in Whittier, for example, which was about 40 minutes away.
Yep.
Thank you, Rachel, for that question. And thank you everyone for being here today. We are on time. And if you have any last words, or Jenny, would you like to say something? I just want to say we're going to have this recording on YouTube and on our Facebook group. You can share it with anyone you like. And there are many people here in the Hebrew speaking community to support with any question and guidance or anything that you're curious to hear about.
The only thing I would say is that if anyone is interested in, and on my website, that I do have a course called Never Broken, Nothing Lacking. One Cause, One Cure, Fresh Hope, starting in March 28th, twice a month for 2 hours, twice a month for anyone that wants to have a nicer life.
Yeah, we put the link to your website here in the chat, and we can send it on the group to anyone who would like to join.
Yeah.
I've been a couple years ago, and it was full of information, full of beautiful knowledge that you accumulated from all around the world. Beautiful place to sit.
Well, and I try to remember that it's not about the intellectual knowledge, but if you understand the whole system, whatever the system is, you're less likely to hurt yourself with it. Whether it's electricity or gravity or God, life, and mind together. Or Jenny, did you have any last thoughts?
I just wanted to thank you and to say that I'm really honored to be here. I'm really honored just to be and to listen to you and to explore with you. And I really wanted to thank all the people who came here today. And
Me too.
it's beautiful. Just beautiful to see with you together and to bring more hope, more understanding, and much, much, much more love to this field.
Good. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for being open enough to listen and just listen inside. Don't listen to me. Listen inside. I love Mr. Banks says that, and it's an incredible statement in the Enlightened Gardener Revisited. It just touches me so much every time I read it. He says, as big as the galaxies are, with billions of galaxies, with billions of stars, what God has placed inside our own consciousness, all of that is minuscule, very small compared to what God has placed inside of every human being. Wow. Wow. It's hard to wrap the intellect around that, but to me, it resonates as true. And it's incremental. I love what Aviva said. If we can this is not like learning to ride a bike or learning to swim. Once you know how to do either of those, you know how. The last thing I'll leave you with that seems to be helpful to people is that just if you stay grateful for what you see, you'll see more. And some people after 5, 6, 7 years, they say, oh, I feel like I haven't learned anything because X happened and now I'm, you know, if we could see that when we start to create pain for ourselves, that we're just being given an opportunity, that our level of understanding is not up to the challenge that we're facing in life. So we're being given an opportunity to go through one or more of those infinite doors of understanding. It's an opportunity. And we can be excited. I get excited when I'm in emotional pain because I know I'm being given an opportunity to see beyond what I've seen. That's different.
And I must say that the principles are a great navigation and great understanding of navigation, of life, of relationship, of business, of body. I had to try it on everything just to make sure.
Right.
It's beautiful. It's like my 7-year-old, she said, Mom, do you know that when you are pulling the rope, the guy who is standing on the hill is always winning? So I said to my friend, you should stay on the hill and not facing with your back to the hill, because then you will lose. And she said, and guess what, Mom? He won every time because he understood the principle.
Okay. I'm going to need to go, so my wife and I aren't late, but I thank you, everybody.
Everyone
you
can
so
unmute. You unmute yourself to say goodbye. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
welcome. You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Very welcome.
לילה
sir.
טוב.
Good night.
Thank you.
לילה טוב.
Thank you. Thank you. So good. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Aviva.
Bye.